This is a random thought, but that's kind of how I try to start these episodes. I don't think that there is a worse day of the week than Tuesday. I mean, even on Monday, you've got some energy, you've got some excitement. It's a new week, like you're looking forward to something, perhaps. Yeah, the weekend is over, but does anybody really go hard on Sundays to the point where Monday feels like such a drag? No, you spend a lot of Sunday resting and relaxing and preparing for Monday. At least I feel like a lot of people do. And Monday, you got a little bit of pep in your step. All right, new week, back in the routine. Let's do some good stuff here. But when you wake up Tuesday, oh my gosh. Tuesday is so far away from Friday. And it's still not Wednesday, and that's hump day, and I think that's maybe second place in the worst day of the week voting. But you are so far away from the weekend, from all that stuff that you're looking forward to when you wake up on Tuesday and you're tired from everything you did on Monday. I know that we're in the throes of June, right? We've now reached it. There's not as much to talk about in the world of sports, but I'll tell you what. I hate Tuesdays for whatever reason. I just dislike Tuesdays. That's part of the reason why I stopped recording the podcast on Tuesdays. I started doing it on Wednesday mornings. Because Tuesdays just suck. But here we are. It's Wednesday. Let's get into it. Hi, hello, and welcome into the Ball Don't Lie podcast, episode number 139, he said as he fiddled with his microphone. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. This might be a little bit of a shorter episode today. I don't have a ton of time to record this, but there's still some important stuff to talk about. Let's start with the Bengals and with Shemar Stewart. The rookie still has not signed his contract. I believe there's 6, maybe 7 first-round picks that have yet to sign their contract. And there's been multiple reports out there about what they are quabbling over, what the disagreement is. Hell, at one point, even Shemar's stepdad went on a podcast to talk about it and how they felt like they were being treated unfairly. I'm not a big fan of people's family members going on podcasts, and we've talked about that previously, but I wanted some clarification because I still didn't fully understand what the disconnect is here between the Bengals and between Shemar Stewart and defaults and precedents and draft selection and slotted money and all. I was very confused. I feel like I know enough, but I don't know. It just seemed kind of silly to me, right? So what I did, I hosted Cincy 360 by myself last Friday, and I sought out the expertise of an attorney, a Bengals fan, and an expert when it comes to these contract language and litigation, that sort of stuff. I was like, can somebody explain this to me like I'm 5 years old? So I talked to Andre Perrotta, and you can follow him on Twitter at Andre Perrotta 13. He does a great job breaking down contracts, not just the Bengals, but across the NFL, and has helped me a lot understand the differences between the Bengals, the way the Bengals do business, and the way other teams do business. So I had him on the show on ESPN 1530 on Friday, and I asked him to just kind of clarify what exactly is going on here. What is the difference between Shemar Stewart and the Bengals, and help me to make sense of it. His answer really helped me, and I hope it helps you. Here's a few minutes of my conversation with Andre Perrotta.
But really, the true haggling, the negotiable aspects of these rookie contracts really have to do with the timing of the payments, for example. Like we know what Shemar Stewart's contract eventually will be. It's going to be a 4-year, just under $19 million. It's going to be 4 years, $18.942 million. He's going to get a signing bonus of a little under $10.5 million. And we even know what his first-year cap hit will be. But what his agent or his camp and the Bengals front office are negotiating is, when does he get the signing bonus payment? Is that a one lump sum payment? Is it split into 2 payments? Is one of the payments half of that $10.4 million and the other half is spread over the course of the regular season? So that's an aspect to be negotiated. Also, the future year salaries, is that in the form of a base salary, or could you get a training camp roster bonus? And in fact, I think Kelsey Conway for the Inquirer had a nice article regarding that issue. That's an aspect that can be negotiated. But so those are all tied to the money aspects of the contract, even though the money, the whole dollar amounts, like I've said, are predetermined and slotted. But it just as importantly as the timing of those signing bonus and potential future year roster bonus payments, what I think, as reported by Pro Football Talk over the weekend last Saturday, is the language of the contract, which is also critically important, and specifically the language regarding the voiding of guarantees. Shemar's contract will be fully guaranteed. The guarantees in NFL contracts are for three pillars, essentially: skill, injury, and salary cap purposes. So if the Bengals have to cut him if he's injured as a result of a football injury, or they need salary cap room to sign another player, or his skill just deteriorates, or he never develops into a player, and they cut him for those reasons, skill, cap, and injury, his money is protected. However, there is what's called default language in these contracts. If a player gets suspended, if the player is arrested, if the player just goes AWOL, if the player makes public comments against the team, then those are considered not just in the Bengals contracts, mind you, but across the league, across all other 31 clubs. They have default language in these contracts that say, if you commit an event of default, then your guarantees will void. It doesn't mean the contract terminates. It just means that the guaranteed money is just not there. The player can still earn the money. It's just not guaranteed in the event the contract is terminated. So those are the aspects that are still up for negotiation, these rookie deals.
So let's focus on that default part, since that, as you mentioned, Pro Football Talk kind of reported as one of the sticking points. Do other teams already have that in place, and the Bengals haven't used it in the past?
Yeah, so we don't know exactly which teams do, but the article that you mentioned from Pro Football Talk did reflect the fact that I don't know if it's a majority, but some other team, the Bengals aren't alone here in terms of wanting to get this language. Other teams have gotten this language, which effectively just boils down to this: if the player commits a default, let's say he gets suspended by the league for, let's say, performance-enhancing drugs. These players get tested at least once annually for PD, sometimes more. If Shemar, let's just use an example of failing a performance-enhancing drug test. If that happens in his first year, does that void his guarantees in year 4? Shemar and his camps are saying it should not, because Amarius Mims' contract does not have that language, apparently, and neither do other Bengals players. But other teams, for example, like the Philadelphia Eagles, I believe, are a team that says any default in any year will void the guarantees in future years. So it is tricky here because the Bengals are trying to set a precedent here with Shemar. And how do you set a precedent? Well, you just said it. Somebody has to be the guinea pig, for lack of a better term, and go first. It's just that Shemar is trying to utilize the little leverage he does have. And the leverage he does have here is, well, I was picked even, Amarius Mims was picked a pick behind me last year, pick 18, and you didn't require him to sign the contract with this language. And now you're asking me to sign this language. It's a bit unfair. But when viewed in the context of the entire scope of the rest of the National Football League, what the Bengals are asking here is really not out of bounds. They're effectively saying even a default could be, let's say he's arrested for whatever reason.
Right.
The Bengals are saying if you're arrested in any year, that should void your guarantees in all future years. Again, not terminate your contract, just voiding the guarantees.
So there you have it. It makes a lot more sense to me now that there is this default type of language in there to try to protect the Bengals from future years, and they only want it in current years. Like, it just makes a little bit more sense to me why, and certainly from Shemar's standpoint as to why, hey, I was drafted ahead of all these guys. Why are you trying to do this to me now? And, I've referenced this before. The Bengals need to do a better job of picking their battles. I don't entirely know why at this point you want to continue this battle. But again, I think with Shemar Stewart and with Trey Hendrickson, the Bengals kind of just have them by the you-know-whats. And there's really nothing those guys can do. They're going to play. I don't know if Trey's going to play, but Shemar's going to play. He doesn't have any leverage. So I kind of expect them to, again, it's also June. I would expect the contract to be done by the time training camp starts in late July. But overall, I just think that this is not something worth fighting over if you're the Bengals. I also don't know if it's something worth fighting over if you're Shemar Stewart. The main reason for that being that those defaults, which are the sticking point, are player controlled. If you fail a drug test, if you get arrested, the Carl Pickens clause, which is you talk terribly about the team or the organization, or if you go AWOL, if you decide to quit football, whatever, like there have to be protections for both sides here, and it makes sense to me why the Bengals would do that. And one of the reasons why it makes sense to me is because of Germaine Burton. You remember him, the Bengals' third-round pick from a year ago. Well, Burton was seen having episodes out on the street, throwing his phone and slamming it in the ground and cussing at people, and he was late on his rent, and there were police called to his apartment several times, and he didn't show up for meetings, and at one point was left home during a road trip. That's an example right there, right? So here, let's say that that's a first-round pick. Let's say it's a guy like him, and he has more guaranteed money, and he goes AWOL, or he loses his mind, or he has some sort of arrest or criminal charge, or he fails a drug test, whether that's a steroid test or a recreational drug test, whatever it might be, that protects the Bengals from a player making poor decisions. Makes sense. And if you're the player, hey, if I don't make poor decisions, I'll get all that money. So I see both sides of it here. Now, speaking of Germaine Burton, the Bengals are in OTAs again this week, and so far, everything we've heard this offseason has been good about Germaine Burton. I think that's a key to this team this year, because we saw just flashes a little bit in preseason and flashes a little bit during the regular season of Germaine Burton's athletic ability. The problem was he had a bunch of issues off the field, wasn't sure if he really loved football, was trying to learn how to be a pro, and I'm not sure if last year was the right environment, with Jamar Chase upset about his contract, with T. Higgins upset about his contract, and just the overall distractions and state of the Bengals and the wide receiver room, to be specific. I don't know if that was really a place where you could plug Germaine Burton in and those guys could kind of show him the ropes. It seems to be this year, through the conversations with T. Higgins and with Germaine Burton and others, that the environment is much more conducive to helping Germaine Burton become a professional. We also heard about him during the draft and how he was present and has been present each day, and he's been in Cincinnati working and getting into a routine. Joe Burrow has said that Germaine Burton has certainly shown signs of maturity. Hopefully, all the off-the-field stuff has been cleaned up, and the Bengals have given him the help he feels like he needs, and he is hopefully going to return them the favor in being able to be a productive third-round pick. Because, again, if they hit on a guy like that, that brings an entirely different level to the offense. More athleticism and more explosiveness than an Andre Yosivas, and probably more durability and a little bit more flexibility within the offense than a guy like Charlie Jones, who I'm still high on those two guys, but Charlie's been hurt a lot, and Andre Yosivas, I just don't know if he has the athletic profile to be one of those great players. I hope he does. I hope he gets to that point. Just not sure if he's there. So if Germaine Burton can be a part of the Bengals offense moving forward, that would be huge. Let's hope all those off-the-field issues are behind him. So that's kind of a peek behind the curtain. I appreciate Andre for coming on the show and making sense of that. If you like that, let me know, because it felt like it made a whole lot more sense to me, and maybe for whatever reason it just wasn't clicking, and maybe you're screaming at your podcast listening device right now saying, duh, Auty, you should have known this from the beginning. You might be right. But listen, I don't know everything, even though I look like it. What else? Bengals offense. Joe Burrow said something this week that raised some headlines. I'm going to take a drink of my cup of Joe. Burrow said something this week that raised some headlines, or last week, or whenever it was when he was speaking. And I don't know that everyone quite understood the point that Joe was trying to make. And so I'll read the quote to you, and curious to know what your response is. I'll try to make sense of it for you. Here's the quote from the Bengals quarterback. "If I had played even better, we wouldn't have been in that spot that we were in. I just focus on getting better myself, and I feel like everyone in the locker room feels the same way. If I go out there and play better than I did last year, then it doesn't matter what goes on anywhere else." End quote. So everyone takes the snippets of that comment and say, Joe Burrow says if he played better, the Bengals would have made the playoffs. That's true. Go back to week 1 against New England. It might have been Burrow's altogether worst game as a pro. That game, 2021, week 2, week 3 in Chicago was a terrible game that he played. He was awful against New England. He just wasn't very good. He fumbled in that game. Fumbles would be an issue later on in the season as well for Joe. Now, the difference is, so let's run through a few of the things that Joe did wrong over the season. The fumbles happened, including the fumble in Kansas City that led to a touchdown for the Chiefs. That was not good. The first Baltimore game, the slant to Ja'Marr Chase where Burrow just threw a pass that wasn't a great pass, wasn't as accurate as we're used to seeing from him. Marlon Humphrey jumps it, they intercept the ball. The second Baltimore game, the 2-point conversion, felt like Joe did not look to his left. He kind of rushed the pass, should have come back left, found Ja'Marr Chase. Those are just a couple of examples of bad moments where if Joe plays better, maybe the result is different, right? I think those are fair. I think Joe would agree with those things, especially the fumbles, which he lost a couple over the course of the season, including in the first Pittsburgh game in Cincinnati. So, on that level, there's maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 plays you'd like to have back over the course of a season if you're Joe Burrow. Now, the margin of error in the National Football League is that thin. It can be that big of a difference between you're making the playoffs and not making the playoffs. So, if you look at it in that context, Joe's right. If I played better, we probably make the playoffs. Okay, yeah, 100%. But if you go back to those other games, week 1, New England, Tanner Hudson, Burrow threw an accurate pass, caught it across the middle, he's going into the end zone, he starts showboating, he fumbles. That ball was recovered by New England, the Bengals didn't score. So if Tanner Hudson had played better, well then, the Bengals would probably be in the playoffs. How about fast forwarding to Kansas City, where on a 4th and 16, Dejon Anthony is called for a pass interference. Whether or not you agree with the call, if the refs had performed better, if Dejon Anthony had performed better, if Lou Anarumo had had a better defensive play call, the Bengals win that game and they're in the playoffs. How about in the second Baltimore game on a Thursday night? If the officials had called either of the 2 penalties that were clear and obvious on that 2-point conversion, the hands to the face against Burrow, the pass interference against Gesicki, then maybe the Bengals get a second chance and they win that game. What about in the first Baltimore game, where after Burrow threw that terrible interception, the Bengals still forced overtime, got the ball back in overtime, and then fumbled the snap on a field goal attempt to potentially win the game? What about Germaine Pratt not missing 1,000 tackles in the first Bengals game against the Pittsburgh Steelers? Could things have been different then? So the point is, yes, Burrow plays better. The Bengals are in the playoffs. He had 10 plays maybe in most of a game in which he could have played better, but one of his touchdown passes was taken back because of a fumble. Officials did not help them at times last year. Fumbles by the special teams unit and missed kicks by Evan McPherson, missed tackles by Germaine Pratt. You can say that not only about Joe, but about the other 52 guys on the roster. So to me, over the last week, it's felt like that conversation, that quote, has been taken out of context for Joe Burrow. And, he's not wrong. I think he's right. But ultimately, everybody has to play better if you want to reach that level. Speaking of that level, I'm just going to put this out there as something to keep in mind as we head towards the 2025 season. Which, by the way, we're under 100 days until the return of the National Football League. Praise be. You need to temper your expectations. I said this about Terry Francona and the Reds, and come to find out I've been right so far, that maybe we're putting a little too much on... we're hyping Terry Francona a little bit too much. We're putting too many eggs in the basket of, Terry Francona is going to fix everything, right? You look at the season that Joe Burrow had last year, the best in the history of Bengals quarterbacks. You look at the season that Ja'Marr Chase had last year, the best in the history of Bengals wide receivers. And truthfully, one of the best in the history of professional football from a wide receiver. I don't think it's realistic to expect that level of play again in 2025. Are they capable of that? Absolutely they are. But teams adjust over the course of the offseason. How are the Bengals adjusting to the adjustments will be the big part. Can the offensive line actually take a step forward and protect Joe a little bit more? What does the offense look like with a more consistent run game? And if it is a more consistent run game, that's going to bring some of the numbers down for Joe and Shemar as well. The point being, they're great players and they can perform greatly, but I don't know if the standard moving forward or the expectation moving forward should be 40 touchdown passes and a triple crown every year. I want that to be the case. I know they're capable of that, but putting this out there now, everyone's talking about, well, if the defense plays better, they're going to be fine because the offense is going to score. I agree with that, but I fear that we will become, as fans, maybe a little bit too reliant or believe too much that the offense is just going to pick up where it left off and be fantastic from jump with Joe and Shemar and T, everybody happy on long-term deals. I just want to pump the brakes a little bit. They're good. They're capable. My expectation is for them to play at that type of level. But I don't know if the expectation is fair to expect them to exceed that or be better than that or even reach that again in 2 straight years. That sort of consistency, that sort of performance doesn't happen all that often in the NFL year by year by year. Truly the great, great players do that. And Joe and Shemar, I believe, are great, great players. I hope that they feel the challenge to live up to that again this year, and I hope that they meet that. But be prepared because it may not come as easy to them next year as it came to them last year. One other point before I let you go. I mentioned Germaine Pratt. Do you remember him? Well, Germaine Pratt requested a trade a long time ago. The reason for this was that the Bengals had fired Lou Anarumo, they had hired Al Golden, and Germaine Pratt, $5.5 million, doesn't really make sense for the future of the Bengals, especially considering the way he's performed. He's lost a step, he's a little bit slow, he's a poor tackler, he's not a very bright guy at all. And so you look at it and you're like, all right, that makes sense. Maybe they could trade Germaine, get a 7th-round pick or something out of him, and they'll save $5.5–6 million against the cap. Makes sense for all sides. Germaine gets what he wants. He's able to play at that price. He doesn't have to take a pay cut by getting cut, and the Bengals get something in return. Well, apparently it hasn't been that simple because Germaine Pratt is still on the roster. The Bengals can also designate him as a post-June 1st cut, which, by the way, it's post-June 1st, and get that full $5.5 million saved against the cap. They could have done that at any point, and yet they didn't. He requested that trade back in February. And here we are, through free agency, through the draft, now through OTAs and mandatory minicamp coming up next week, and Germaine Pratt is still a Bengal. There's really no indication as to why. Especially when you think about the draft and the fact that they drafted 2 linebackers in Barrett Carter and Demetrius Knight Jr., which would also paint the picture to say, oh, and by the way, they signed Oren Burks in free agency. All that to suggest, okay, Germaine Pratt's not going to be here. But yet, he's still here. Why is that? Number one option is maybe they changed their mind, and they want Germaine Pratt here, and him being an insurance policy, and they have the money to pay for it. Maybe that makes sense. Number 2 option is potentially that they're going to wait for somebody to get hurt between now and the start of training camp and try to drive Germaine's value up a little bit. Okay, potentially. I see that. I don't know. I haven't looked at his contract to know what his workout bonuses are, to see if he gets a bonus for showing up to training camp. You would think if he does, the Bengals would want to move on from him by then, and that would still be about a month and a half that they have to make that decision. I don't know that anything's going to change between now and the start of training camp for any team in the league that they would want to be, all right, we're going to go get Germaine Pratt for $5.5–6 million. Just doesn't make sense. Why he's here doesn't make sense. Why a team would want him at that price doesn't make sense. And I'm not really sure how this is going to go. I guess I expect them to cut him right before training camp. I don't know. This is one of the more puzzling things about the Bengals this offseason is, why is Germaine Pratt still here? I don't know the answer to that question. All right, that does it for this week's episode of Ball Don't Lie. It was number 139, I believe. I don't know if I said that at the beginning. Thank you so much for listening, and please like, subscribe, follow, whatever. Give it a rating if you're on Apple Podcasts, and tell somebody you know about the podcast. I really appreciate it. You can hear me weekdays from noon to 3 on ESPN 1530. Listen anywhere on the iHeartRadio app. I co-host that show. It's called Cincy 360. With Tony Pike. Also invite you to follow me everywhere on all social media platforms at Auty Elmore, AutyElmore. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you again next week. Mandatory mini camp. We'll expect some training camp news coming up and a whole lot more. Going to be a fun summer. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. And as always, he said, stuttering. Have fun, be safe, go Bucks.